What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and learn about why 50% of Canadians live south of this line. Canadians, what are you? Some of this line is in America. What are you doing here? Actually, I'm happy you're here. I welcome you with open arms. Anyway, if I haven't made it abundantly clear, I have no idea why 50% of Canadians live south of this line. Although, based on some of the geography of Canada that I recently have become aware of, Canadian cities and important landmarks and populated areas are much closer to the United States Canada, the United States-Canada border than I ever knew. It blows my mind, actually, that some of the biggest Canadian cities are so close to America, so south. So could that have something to do with all of this? Maybe? And I know there's some strange parts of America that go up and parts of Canada that come down, and we kind of commingle and kind of gel together. It's kind of beautiful in a way, a little warm hug or handshake that America and Canada is permanently embraced in. Anyway, not to get overly poetic about it. And with that being said, I'm ready to learn why 50% of Canadians live so far south of whatever this line is, anyway. Let's find out.
Finance and tech in 5 minutes by subscribing with the link down in the description. All right, so this is Canada. We all know that Canadians like to pretend they're further north than Americans are, but they're really not, and
Really? Canadians, do you like to pretend that you're further north than Americans? What pretending is there? Canada is further north than the United States. I think you win that one.
I'm going to prove it to you. This is the 49th parallel, the longest border between two countries anywhere in the world, and the one that's most often thought of as being the dividing line between Canada and America. It's true that most Americans do, in fact, live south of this line, but so do most Canadians.
What? Wait, doesn't this represent the border, technically? Wouldn't that mean the Canadians are living in the United States, or is there a technicality here that I need to learn about? This is kind of crazy. Is this a thing? Huh.
In fact, roughly 70% of all Canadians live south of the 49th, in this land shaded red. But
I'm sorry to keep pausing it, but most Americans just assume that the Canadian population is evenly dispersed throughout Canada's, territory. But apparently all that stuff to the north, all that stuff right here. Wait, can I do this? It's right here. That stuff is just not very populated or empty, or is it just land that's unusable and everyone's huddled together living in this section underneath the 49th parallel? I had absolutely no idea that that's how it was. I know that, like I was saying, I know that some important Canadian cities are much more south than I thought, but I never knew.
we can go even lower. A full 50% of all Canadians live south of this line in this relatively tiny area shaded red.
What? 50%. 50%! Half of Canada lives there, in between Michigan and New York. What? All huddled there. I could just visit this little territory and be introduced to half of Canada's population. It'd just be that easy. Anyway, this is really a bizarre fact. Are Canadians just so... This is just such old news to Canadians. They're like, yeah, of course, most of us live there. And I'm just the only one sitting here with their mind blown? I feel like most Americans have never heard of this, are unaware of this. Huh. At least, America really is giving it a hug there on both sides. Wow. I like it.
This means that most Canadians live further south than pretty much the entire US states of Washington, Montana, North Dakota, and obviously Alaska too.
Yeah! Oh my gosh! 50% of Canadians, I'm speechless, I'm sorry, I can't talk. 50% of Canadians live further south than several of the states. What the heck?
But I'm not done embarrassing Canada just yet.
Whoa, I don't think it's embarrassing. Unless Canadians really have a sense of being Northerners, like that's a core part of their identity, being north of the United States. I think it's cool. I think this is pretty cool. This is a fascinating fact. I'm still wrapping my head around it.
This is the southernmost point of Canada on Middle Island in Lake Erie. Zooming out to view more of the North American continent, would it surprise you if I told you that there are, in fact, more Americans who live north of this island than Canadians?
Okay, I can only be so mind blown in the course of like 1 minute. So, yes, I believe it. There you go, narrator. Yeah, I guess I do believe it now. I'll believe anything you say. I don't know what's real anymore. Now I'm starting to think that Americans who live by the Canadian border are probably much more familiar with this fact of how close Canada is to a lot of the states. Because I don't live near the border. Never have. So it's not part of my daily thought process, if you will. But I bet there's a lot of Americans who are way more aware of all this than me. Huh. People in different parts of the world understand things differently than me. Who would have thought?
Well, it shouldn't, because there are, and this is how. Here's the line of latitude drawn precisely over Middle Island's southernmost location. Clearly, all of Canada exists above this line, but a surprising amount of the United States does as well, including this tiny sliver of California. If you're
Yeah.
from California, you can legitimately claim that some of your state goes further north than Canada's southernmost point does.
This is just not something... Now we're starting to get into stuff that I feel like no American knows. That part of California is above part of Canada. No American would agree with that statement. Wow.
With the line this far south, though, a lot of America's largest urban areas exist above Canada's southernmost point.
Yeah.
Like the entirety of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Alaska, and most of Wyoming, Michigan, New York State, and Massachusetts.
I never knew. Yeah, when you paint it like this and force me to acknowledge it, it's like, wow, yeah. A lot of America is above the 50% of the Canadian population, apparently. Huh.
Added up together, this means that more Americans live north of Canada's southernmost point than Canadians do, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
In fact, approximately...
I just didn't realize how deep Canada's southern tip extends and pokes into the United States. I just never... truly appreciated just how much Canada is poking us. Why are you poking us so deeply, Canada? Actually, it's fine.
80% of the entire Canadian population lives within just 100 miles of the United States border. But why? Canada is huge. Why do most Canadians live so close to the American border?
Exactly. There's so much more Canada to the north. Why don't you all spread out there and live there and live off the land? I'm sure there's a good reason for this.
Well, let's start off with the fact that despite being a continent-sized country that's roughly the same size as all of Europe, Canada's population is small. Europe's population is around 750 million, while the almost equivalently sized Canada has a population of only 38 million. That's less people than live in California, and about the same amount as people who live in Poland.
Okay, that's a good point. The population is not as big as I thought. So it's not so much of a feat for 50% of 30 million to all be able to live in a small area like the southern part of Canada. Okay, okay.
38 million people can't possibly settle densely across an area of this huge size.
Right.
And they haven't. Instead, Canada's small population exists in faraway, spread out pockets of population like Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and most significantly, the dense urban and industrialized corridor here between Quebec City in the northeast and Windsor in the southwest. Half of Canada's entire population simply lives within this 700-mile stretch of land that
You know, it's probably because this is just a very, very desirable place to live in Canada. I mean, that's what he's saying, basically. It's super convenient. It's very close to a lot of important cities and places. It's just more convenient and more like, it's just a good place to live. Just like if you're thinking about it purely practically.
that includes Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City.
Right. Quebec City, Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, Windsor are all here. So there you go. That's enough reason all into and of itself.
And it's all because of geography and history. As you're probably aware, Canada can get pretty cold. Half of the country is covered by what's called the Canadian Shield, a
Oh.
huge area of exposed rock with only a tiny layer of topsoil where farming is effectively impossible and winter temperatures are severely cold. You just can't have people or civilization without food.
Wow. See, I can't relate to this as an American. We don't have anything like that. Like a vast amount of territory that's just not very usable for farming and other purposes and gets cold and covered in ice and stuff like that. That makes way more sense.
So that effectively eliminates most of Canada from ever being able to have many big population centers.
Yeah.
Instead, Canada's civilization developed down here away from the Shield, and where large-scale farming is actually possible. And it's possible primarily because of these, the Great Lakes.
Yeah, the Great Lakes. That gives you access to bodies of water, which are important for, civilization. It's all starting to make sense to me. Canadians, you're not so strange after all. This makes perfect sense.
These are the largest collection of freshwater lakes anywhere in the world by surface area that pretty much act in a similar way as an inland sea does, like the Mediterranean or the Baltic. The lakes soak up heat and cool the air down in the summertime, and then they radiate that heat back out slowly throughout the autumn months.
Yes. This blew my mind when I learned about how bodies of water can have such a massive impact on temperature and weather. Amazing.
Preventing the area that surrounds them from getting as cold as the areas that don't. When combined with the frequent influx of warm, moist air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, this does wonders for warming up the surrounding region's climate. So because of this effect, the Quebec City-Windsor corridor has richer and deeper soil than anywhere else in Canada does. And that means that large-scale agricultural farming operations that can support a large population are possible here, and almost no...
Wow, look at all that farming, agriculture. So this is the existence of so much of the population living in this part of Canada is practical. It's purely practical. It was probably done a long, long time ago in Canada's history where the Canadians were like, hey, this is the place to be. It's warm. We can survive here.
Nowhere else where it's just too cold and too rocky. The climate is so good here that it's even possible to grow fruit in orchards and even establish wineries. But the climate and agricultural potential is only half of the reason why this is where most Canadians live.
Oh, what could the other reason be? I just feel like it's being in such close proximity to the United States is like helpful for the economy and trade? Is that a reason?
The other reason is geopolitical significance and power projection. This is the St. Lawrence River, and it's one of the most historically significant rivers in all of world history. It contains the world's largest estuary, and for most of the past 5 centuries, was the only easy way for the Europeans to explore the North American interior. Historically, European ships from the Atlantic could enter into the St. Lawrence and sail down only as far south as the dangerous and impassable Lachine Rapids here, which is conveniently right where the city of Montreal happened to be developed and settled.
Okay. So it has more to do with ship travel in a time long ago, and the fact that you couldn't sail your ship past this impassable rapids. So they started establishing, they're just like, we'll stop here, guys. Everyone out. Time to build Montreal.
Which is conveniently right where the city of Montreal happened to be developed and settled. For hundreds of years, Montreal was the primary port town on the St. Lawrence and the gateway to the North American interior for ships sailing in from the Atlantic. But over the centuries, humanity expanded upon nature's limitations. Eventually, in the early 19th century, the Canadians constructed the Lachine Canal across Montreal Island to bypass those dangerous rapids and, combined with a complex series of other canals and locks across the other various lakes and canals that culminated with the St. Lawrence Seaway being opened up in 1959, ocean-going vessels could finally and freely travel all the way between the Atlantic and each of the Great Lakes.
Wow, this is just human ingenuity at its finest. Exploration, following the St. Lawrence River, is it? All the way down, getting past the rapids, and basically forming what would become the border of Canada and the United States, based on where you could sail your ship and get to. So the second reason for people being located here was just, it was physically possible to get there.
Which established cities like Toronto, Buffalo, Detroit, Chicago, and Duluth as other important trading ports with access to the world's oceans. This is partly why cities like Chicago in particular became the epicenter of the American railway system. It's relatively centrally located within the country, and with access to the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence, goods can be imported and exported from here across the world's oceans. Because of all this, a massive amount of lucrative trade has flown along the St. Lawrence for decades, and all of it has to pass through the ports of Toronto.
I figured some of this must be based on the practicality of, hey, this is a good spot for trade. I just didn't realize about the bodies of water and the ship routes being so important for reaching the ocean, and I would never have come up with that, but that's really interesting.
Montreal and Quebec City, increasing all of these cities' prominence and leading to them becoming the top destinations for immigrants coming to Canada from abroad. Just look at the historical population data of Toronto and Montreal. In a single century between 1881 and 1986, Toronto's population absolutely exploded from a town of 86,000 people to a metropolis of 2.2 million.
A metropolis, wow, there's a word for you. So basically, the city was built in such a smart location. Just that alone set the stage for it to explode in popularity and population. That's pretty cool. That's pretty forward-thinking, high IQ play by the Canadians.
While Montreal went from about 150,000 people to 1.7 million in the same time period. That is why currently about 50% of all Canadians live south of this line, and why around 80% of Canadians live within 100 miles of the United States border. The border that's been closed for over a year now and is finally opening back up again next month.
Oh, when was this video made? July 2021. Okay, at least that day is come and past.
In response to COVID-19, Canada shut the entire border down with the United States to non-essential travel back in March 2020, and they're finally opening it back up again on August 9th after 1 year and 5 months, which is the longest the US-Canada border has been shut down for since the War of 1812, more than 2 centuries ago. A lot of what's happening today is based on what happened yesterday or last week. As Canada's long border closure with America has finally ended, and as someone with friends in Canada who visited the country often from the States, these events directly impacted my life over the past year.
Yeah, I mean, this is really shaping my perspective on the travel between Canada and the United States. I always knew that it was common to travel between the two countries, a wonderful thing, but I never realized how accessible Canada was to Americans and America to Canadians. because I've never traveled between the border. I've never lived near the border. So I didn't have really a mental image in my mind when I thought about that. So this is much needed information for me. This is good. This is good stuff for me.
I was literally in Canada in March before the border was closed, and left back to the United States without realizing that it would be nearly a year and a half until I would be able to return again.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to understand why the border closure kept getting extended throughout this past year, and so I began keeping up with the events by reading the frequent short articles that were being posted to Morning Brew every month.
I was like, I was wondering. I was like, where is he going with this? Is this an ad? Yes. It's an ad for Morning Brew. Okay, I appreciate the hustle. Okay, that's actually the end of the video. He got me. He got me with his sponsored segment. That was real life lore. I still liked your video. I still like you, real life lore. That was a smooth sponsorship insert. Anyway, this was great. This was almost too much for me. I feel like I was having a mental breakdown during this video. Coming to terms with the fact that 50% of the Canadian population lives south of like 10 of the states in the United States, that I could basically toss a muffin and hit a Canadian on the head. They're so close to me. I had no idea. It's actually pretty cool. It totally gives me a better picture in my mind of the geographical relationship between America and Canada. And if that sounds sad to Canadians watching, that it took till right now for me to grasp that, I blame the American education system for not, I can't even remember going over the Canadian-American border or geography of Canada ever in my American education. Just, elementary school, high school. I don't remember it ever. It had to have been brought up at some point, maybe once ever. But it's really just up to day-to-day American talk to bring it up Canada and geography, and it doesn't really happen. So yeah, I didn't know most of this. I barely knew any of this, which made it fascinating for me. I feel like I got to experience a lot watching this video. This was great. I really enjoyed this. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada, Canadian culture, Canadian things and places that I've never seen ever before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.